everybody. Emma here. Just before we get into things, I wanted to let you know why you'll find our voices are distorted in this episode. That's because we've got a natural balance dentist on. Natural balance dentistry isn't legal in all of Canada, so we need to protect this person's identity. Also, you'll see a horse skull instead of a human if you're watching the YouTube video, which is to also protect their identity, as well as it's a great demo tool. So I encourage you to watch it on YouTube so you can see what this person is talking about. And yeah, that's all. Otherwise, hope you enjoy the podcast.
Recorded in the beautiful mountains of British Columbia. Welcome to
Friends on Horses.
Welcome back to Friends on Horses. Today we have a really exciting guest. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice that one of our screens today is actually a horse skull, because we are going to be keeping the identity of this individual confidential. We can tell you that they are a dentist who practices in Western Canada. And what I'll do is I'll hand it over to them to add any other pieces that I've missed.
Well, welcome, fantastic dentist guest. Maybe you could elaborate on what you do and why there is a horse skull, a very attractive horse skull, instead of your lovely face on our screen.
Hi, it's great to be with you guys today. Yes, my horse skull, we travel around all throughout Western Canada, and we're on first name basis. His name is Joe. So Joe and I are kind of incognito today because in many parts and many provinces, and all but I think 4 states in the United States, equine dentistry is illegal unless you are a practicing veterinarian. And this ruling has a lot of people, and as well as associations being formed into different groups, as well as, like in British Columbia, they have the BCAOA, which is the Animal Owners Rights Association, in order to choose the practitioner of your liking in order to treat your horse. So whether it's chiropractic, essential oils, homeopathy, acupuncture, or dental medicine, dentistry for your horse, you're only able to use a veterinarian in many of these cases. And Alberta is the only province in Canada that you have the right to choose. And that is because the Cattlemen's Association went up against the Veterinarian Association and said, we have the right to be able to choose who looks after our animals. And you guys are very important as far as the veterinarians go, but you don't know everything, and you don't specialize as well. So as in human doctors, there are dentists, there are chiropractics. Are you guys still with me? I think I lost you there.
Oh, we're still here. Mira's visual just kind of popped off for a second, but yeah, no, you can continue on.
Okay, so in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and then Maritimes as well, it is illegal to practice dentistry or chiropractic as well, amongst some other natural modalities. So that's why there's just a horse skull today, and I was I always bring my horse skull along so I can explain to people what I'm doing, because it's hard to look in your horse's mouth. And I allow the owners to get in and feel the before and after and understand. And then when I can also show you on the skull itself, it makes a lot more sense instead of just having the light and the power float in there. I like to enlighten people so when they see the difference and feel the difference, they understand what I'm doing, which is really important. It gives power back to the people and power back to the horses as well.
I really enjoyed, I have seen some Natural Balance Dentist's work before, and I definitely enjoyed seeing the horse skull and having really solid explanations that related to the biomechanics of my animal, as to, you know, what's going on in the mouth and how that's affecting my you know, my horse or other people's horses. So I found that a super cool tool, and as you mentioned, it's quite empowering. Now, one thing that you brought up before the podcast started recording was that there are some differences between natural balance dentists and veterinary dentists, and how they kind of support, or how they should be supporting each other, like what you feel some of those roles might look like that would be beneficial to horse people. Do you feel comfortable kind of going into that a little bit too?
Absolutely. Yes, I
Awesome.
can. So basically, I'm going to start from the beginning here as far as a horse goes and the development. Understanding what the teeth provide to the horse. Most of us think the teeth just provide chewing, mastication of the food. Well, also it provides a lot of proprioceptive information through the entire body, the top line, the limbs, and especially the hooves of the foot. Now, I learned how to understand how horses' teeth actually affect the locomotion of the horse when I also learned more about, in my practices, the wear of feet. So if you have feet in a horse not being able to take the correct lead, or a stiff bending one way or another, before you call the chiropractic, or before you rule in navicular or other type of limb disorders, we want to make sure that the mobility of the jaw is there, because the mobility of the jaw to move in all three directions is very, very important in order for the body to follow. So where the jaw goes, the body will go as well. Where the jaw cannot go, the body cannot go as well. So when we're talking about the different directions, if we look at our horse, he's obviously got to open his mouth up and down.
Mm-hmm.
He also will move his jaw laterally, side to side, like this. And what's really important that we see a lot of domestic horses, this is a domestic horse pathology in the horse's mouth. The jaw has to be able to move forward and back like this, just a little bit, about half an inch forward, half an inch back. Now, when we are riding our horses, the inability for the horse to have the forward and back motion of the jaw is called anterior posterior movement. The side to side is called lateral movement. And of course, open and close. Now this open and close, we've all seen Cookie Monster eating cookies, haven't we? Okay, and when a horse starts to chew like the Cookie Monster, we know that there's no lateral and there's certainly no AP motion. And that is where we start to see horses will become very stiff in the top line and not want to collect. Now, understanding what inhibits the lateral and the AP is where we see a big hole in the education system between the veterinarians and the equine dentists. And it depends on the equine dental schools that you actually go to. There are quite a few in the United States that do still teach equine dentistry, but along the same lines as what the veterinarians are being taught as well in colleges throughout Canada and the United States. And it's really interesting because from a natural balanced education that I received, I started with Spencer LaFleur in New York, and then also traveled out west to the West Coast in Washington State, and finished my dental practice with a practicing equine dentist out there who I'm also going to respect his privacy, because Washington State is one of the places that it's illegal to practice in. I can tell you for sure that he is probably one of the best natural balance dentists that there are in the United States, and he traveled all through the United States right down to North and South Carolina, and I was fortunate enough to spend 3 months on the road with him. That's where I learned how to do my practice. So it's interesting because when we were traveling together, we can actually get in the horse's mouth and understand and feel, by feeling what's going on in the horse's mouth, we could isolate and actually pinpoint the colleges that the students from the vet colleges were turned out of, because every practitioner, whether you're a vet or your dentist, has their little technique of doing teeth, and sometimes some of the important pathologies were missed. So when we talk about pathologies, it's the same as in a hoof. There's a proper way for a hoof to function. And do you guys trim your horses barefoot?
Yeah, we I think both of us, we have the same barefoot trimmer.
We
Okay.
do, yes.
Okay, great. So you understand what a proper functioning hoof looks like. And when you go out there and you're looking at feet, there's so many unbalanced, unhealthy feet that when you see a good foot, you don't even recognize it. You just see that it's aesthetically pleasing, but you don't know why. Because you're so used to seeing long toes and underrun heels and flared feet and over diverging feet and crooked feet, straight hairlines, high heels. You don't know what a good foot looks like, and when you see one, you don't recognize it. It's kind of the same with the teeth. We see horses that are so stuck in their top lines and so reluctant to bend, and we see heavier bits and longer shanks and tie downs. When I started back probably about 25 years ago, my first little quarter horse I bought, and this was kind of why I got into dentistry in the first place, he was ridden in a bicycle chain tie down because he tossed his head so bad. And now I know what I know. It would have been all his teeth. And the reason I got into this is I used to use my veterinarian every year. We'd come out, and it did not matter how old the horse was. We floated the horse every year, every single year, right up into their 25 to 30 years. Well, when the horses are young, that's when you, between the ages of 2 to 6, you want to check them every year. You might not float them, but you want to check them yearly. If everything's going along, all the caps are off, they have good balance, then you don't really have to see them for every 2 to 3 years. Granted, they're not standing in a tie stall or a box stall. They're living a natural lifestyle, eating and grazing with their heads down. And when we see horses floated every year after the age of 10, we're taking off more tooth than is actually erupting. And some horses can actually run out of teeth by the time they're 15 to 16. They should have enough tooth to last them well into their 30s. So this little Palomino horse I had was overfloated, and he was only 22 at the time. And what I know about dentistry now, what he had was a protruding lower number 9, which is this tooth here. I'm going to get into teeth a little bit in a little bit to explain to you guys this, but number 9 was protruding and cupping out the upper number 9. Now what he had was a bit of a wave. That's a wave mouth. When we have a protruding tooth on the bottom that's cupping out the upper, that's what we call this wave. And what was done was, instead of decreasing the tall tooth and giving the upper cupped out one some relief, these 2 bottom teeth were extracted. It took over about an hour and 45 minutes to do that, because the tooth had a lot of root, and due to oversedation and the hanging practice, which should never be done because it puts so much pressure on the atlas and the axis and the pole of the horse, some horses will actually become neurological due to this practice, And it is an accepted practice that is done now in veterinary medicine because they need to ensure that the horse stay at a proper elevation in order for the vet to see inside the mouth, to use the power tools without injuring the horse's gums and cheek and soft tissue inside the mouth. Now imagine if you were sedated and you didn't have a lot of control of your body function, and then you were hung by your head. Regardless of whether the animal is big or small, if you hung a gerbil by its head, the forces upon that pole would be in relation to the size of the bone. If you were hung by your head, it would be the same thing as a horse being hung by his head. It's really a not very safe practice. So when Pal fell, short for Palomino, he also became very injured, and consequently, after that, he died. So it was very sad. And I learned a lot from that experience. So therefore, I went out searching and just decided that I wasn't going to use a vet anymore because it was traumatizing to me. So in the future, what I did was I went out and I learned more about alternatives. And it all started from wonderful people out in BC that were natural practitioners, and her sister are probably one of the grandfathers of natural horsemanship in the interior of BC, and they're the ones that helped me, find out alternatives for my horse. So that's kind of a little bit of my background as far as what got me into this. So now, getting back to understanding the form and function of the teeth and what they do for the horse, we're going to be, everybody knows that a horse chews to masticate his food in order to sustain life. Now, the difference between a domestic horse and a wild horse, they're incredible. We do not see pathologies in wild horses that we see in domestic horses. So the age-old question of, well, wild horses don't need their horses' teeth or their teeth floated, and that's correct, because horses graze, about 18 out of the 24 hours on a variety of textured plants, roots, sticks, trees, shrubs, berries, and also aggregates, gravel, and they will actually pick up tools like rocks that they learn from their dams and their sires to break off any sharp points that they might be feeling when they're young. So they're allowed to live a natural life and be able to self-float. Our domestic horses don't, and they don't have the ability to learn this technique that the wild horses do. Now, in light of this, if you do get kicked in the head and you do break a tooth and your jaw gets all locked up, well, survival of the fittest. That's basically the long and short of it. So what we want to understand is, one, where we start with natural balance dentistry. If you see a person doing dentistry on a horse, whether it's a vet, because many vets out there now have chosen to learn this and not use hand tools, the place where the natural balance dentists start is on the incisors, because the incisors are the ones that actually have the teeth, have the most effect on the alignment of the TMJ joint. That's the joint where the jaw and the maxilla join. These, because they're the furthest away from the TMJ joint, have the greatest effect to the balance. So as the incisors wear or don't wear over time and become crooked and out of balance, these incisors greatly affect the comfort of the TMJ joint. Now, incisors in domestic horses don't get used. Incisors in wild horses get used every day, all day, grazing on many different textures, like we said. And the angle and inclination and length of the incisors should be comparable to a 5-year-old horse for the entire length of the horse's life. Now, you've all seen old horses that are long in the tooth. It's because the incisors are not worn properly because they're used to eating hay and not actually wearing their incisors. One practice that is sometimes done is that these incisors of long, older horses are cut back and down to the length and inclination of a 5-year-old horse. And in doing so, it puts tremendous pressure on the TMJ joint because we're really stretching the ligamental attachments, and the neurological impact that has on a horse is very, very severe. So what we want to do is we want to maintain this angle throughout the horse's life when we start addressing them between the ages of 3 to 5. But if we haven't seen a horse until they are 15 or 16, we don't mess with the length of these incisors because it directly corresponds to the balance that's happening at the TMJ. So one good thing about the veterinary medicine, these incisors are never addressed. But sometimes in dental, depending on where the dentist has taken the schooling from, these are sometimes overfloated. So that's something to be aware of. Minimal work just to allow proper lateral motion that does not catch on the incisors is all you need to do. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, that's great. I'm wondering, just for those listeners who may not be familiar, my understanding is that those front incisors, they'll continue growing throughout the horse's life. Is that correct?
Correct. All teeth do.
Perfect.
Now, yes. A horse is not a beaver. Okay. Beavers produce teeth. They actually grow a tooth, and they don't have a root. Their tooth just grows and grows and grows and grows because they wear it extensively. A horse only has probably about anywhere between 4.5 to 6 inches of tooth through its entire life, and it will start to erupt and grow down. And what causes the eruption of the teeth is the vibration of its partner. Isn't that cool?
That's very cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, so when we talk about the occlusal partner, there's a bottom arcade and there's a top arcade. And yes, the teeth always have to touch each other in order to erupt at a consistent rate. If you take one of the partners out of contact with its other, the tooth will actually hyper erupt, which means that it will grow quicker in order to find its partner. Now, this can be a disadvantage if it's not maintained, but it can be an advantage when it comes to rebalancing the horse's mouth if there's a problem. It's exactly the same as our hoof growth. If you have a crack, you want to take the wall out of contact with the ground, and the tubules on that hoof wall right there will hyper erupt and grow faster, so the foot will grow back into balance. It's an amazing machine, the horse.
Very cool.
So when we talk about the occlusal partner, we're going to go quickly over the teeth. This was actually mentioned on the other podcast that you had with the veterinarian that was also a dentist. I really liked her podcast. That was really cool to listen to a fellow worker. We're starting with arcades. Okay, so a horse has 4 arcades. Arcade number 1, 2, 3, 4. So the head is actually divided into quarters. They can have up to 11 teeth per arcade. That's including the canine and the wolf tooth. The more feral, the more prehistoric horses have more teeth. So sometimes you'll see the very, very, very old prehistoric horses will have all 4 wolf teeth. So the more selective bred horses have more problems with their teeth. That's why minis are just sometimes a little bit of a disaster because they are man-made, and they have a lot of problems in their mouths.
A lot of small dogs come to mind that I've seen with they're overbred and they've got all sorts of teeth problems and extra teeth and just like lots going on in their mouths.
Exactly. So we're starting with the incisors, and we start with the middle tooth here. It's called, it's number 1, and it's the center. This is the medial, so it's number 2. The corner is number 3. Number 4 is the canines. You count it whether it's there or not. So mares generally don't have canines. Some mares, actually, they've discovered that as the mare moves up in pecking order and becomes an alpha mare in the herd, she can actually start to grow canines because it's a hormonal thing. Then we have this little tiny wolf tooth that hides in front of, that's number 5, that hides in front of number 6. Number 6, number 7, and number 8 molars are the premolars. Now the incisors and the first 3 molars, the premolars, they have baby teeth. So they're called deciduous, just the same as on a tree. The tree will lose its leaves. Same with the teeth. The teeth will lose their caps. And then we have number 9, 10, and 11. Those are the permanent molars. The oldest permanent tooth in the horse's body is the number 9, because it will start erupting when the horse is 1 year of age. Okay, so it'll start to erupt at 1, 2, and 3. They will be in wear at 2, 3, and 4. Now, what's really cool is every time a horse loses a cap, there was already another molar in contact and in occlusion to stabilize the mouth. So before this cap falls off, number 9 has to be in wear to stabilize the jaw. Now this is important, because if we go back in time now, in utero, 12 weeks in utero, the first solid object to start developing in the fetus is the first 3 premolars before the skull even starts to develop.
Wow.
So when we think about that, these teeth are pretty important. And there's always a trinity of 3. It's the sacred trinity of 3. These teeth become balanced and in occlusion, and then the skull grows around that, and the TMJ forms around that. Now, when the baby is born, these teeth are in wear and they're touching.
Wow.
They are stabilizing the jaw. They hold the jaw in place as now to whatever this TMJ joint is, whether it's symmetrically perfect or a little bit imperfect in balance, whatever it happens to be, these molars are going to stabilize it as these incisors erupt. So the incisors will align with the TMJ joint, whereas the molars stabilize. So that's the function in the horse's mouth. And the importance, again, grazing, yes, mastication, but there's a reason for the development of the order in which these teeth come in. That's why when you want to maintain the angle and inclination and length of the incisors of that of a 5-year-old, that's correct. But when the horses get older, like I said, you don't want to change it too much, because these are in alignment with the TMJ joint. Now, neurologically, all the nerves that come from, this is very cool, this is work that was done on, by a neurologist, Dr. Robert Bowker, worked with Phil Ratliff, who is a natural balance dentist out of Texas. And they actually started to nerve block teeth one at a time, Dr. Bowker did with Phil, and then they started watching the propriocepting problems that the horses had in the horse being able to feel where they were in time and space with their frog. There are periodontal ligaments that hold the teeth into the skull and into the mandible of the horse that directly communicate with the proprioceptors within the frog.
Wow.
So every Tooth is a calcified nerve ending that also corresponds with different organs in their body. So it's very important that the horse's teeth are in alignment and balanced and not restricting your Cookie Monster chew, your lateral chew, and also your AP movement of the jaw forward and back. So some of the pathologies that we see in the horse's mouth, well, we'll go back here. When you normally would have a float done by your veterinarian, you'll have heard many times, or by if you do use a veterinarian, the horse has some sharp edges, some points, and some hooks.
Mm-hmm.
We're all familiar with those terms, right?
Yes.
Now, the hooks generally occur on the number 6 uppers and the number 11 lowers. That's where the hooks come from. Now, a hook will appear in a mouth when there is an inability for the jaw to move forward and back and occlude all the teeth, the hooks. If the horse is stuck back, this lower hook will grow down on this molar. Do you understand that? Can you see that in the skull?
Yeah,
So
and I was just going to say that I do want to encourage people to watch the YouTube version of this because, I mean, our dentist here is doing a beautiful job describing very clearly for people, but it is cool to see because seeing demonstrates really well. It's very, very clear why that hook would happen as our dentist here is moving this horse's mouth and showing us. So anyways, please watch the YouTube video. Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. So if your jaw is stuck back and you don't have anterior movement, so the jaw won't come forward, you will get a number 6 hook that grows down. Now, if your jaw is stuck forward but won't move back, you will get the lower number 11 hook. And sometimes a jaw will not move forward or back and it'll just be stuck there. And you'll get the number 6 and the number 11 hooks form. Now the horse is kind of like stuck in the bottom of a boat. I always think about it, like you can't move forward and back. There's 0 AP. When you have lack of AP in young horses, it drives them bonkers. They can't focus, they get aggressive, they get bitey, they get kicky, they get head tossing, they're irritable, they chew on things, they're destructive, they're unruly, and just not fun to be around. And
we can probably all think of a young horse like that that's come into our life.
Totally. And when you have an older veteran horse that you're under saddle, they'll be very hard to collect and constantly having to be pulled back, pulled back, pulled back. If they have just lack of AP on one side, on the right or the left side, that horse will only go where the jaw will allow it. So the body will go with the jaw. That's easy to remember. If the jaw wants to go to the right, easy, but will not come to the left, guess which way the horse is going to be dominantly wanting to go? Only to the right. And you'll have to pull like crazy or spur like crazy if you happen to use spurs, or when you're round penning, you'll have to put that side rein on. There's many different things that we do to the horses to try. It's generally in the teeth. What's going on? Again, where the jaw goes, the body will follow. So another thing that impedes, the hooks can impede anterior posterior motion. The hooks will not impede lateral motion, okay? What impedes lateral motion is, yes, the sharp edges, the tall edges. Now, think about this. Edges that are rounded off. Many times we will get in horses' mouths and we will see the edges rounded off so they almost feel like a wooden pencil. And it's soft to the hand and they go, oh, that's really nice. There's no sharp edges there. Would you like to cut a really tough steak with a kid's knife or a nice sharp steak knife? When you think about that, the edges actually need to be sharp, but they shouldn't be tall or long, okay? And the edges on the upper are on the cheek side. the edges on the lower on the tongue side. So it's called the buccal, depending on where you are, cheek side, and lingual, tongue side. When the horse chews, he will open his mouth like the Cookie Monster, and he'll go out and he'll come up and in. So basically, the inside edges of the tongue side on the bottom will grind against the upper cheek side edges. So that's how he's chewing. He will chew lateral like this. And in every chew, depending on the elevation of his head, whether he's chewing on the ground, his head at pool level, or standing up looking around at the dog or the coyotes or the cougars running away and running around them, will the jaw will move forward and back depending on the elevation as he chews laterally. So you'll see horses that generally have a manger at chest level, and that's all they ever eat out of, will have a greatly diminished ability to move anterior posteriorly in their jaw when they're chewing. That's why wild horses, every time a wild horse takes a step, and if he steps down with his left front, he's chewing over here and eating. And he takes a step with his right front, he's chewing over here and he's eating. And he's on the ground and he's looking around and he's checking out the cougars that are around the area, if you live in BC, and their elevation is different with every mouthful. Whereas domestic horses, they don't have that need, or sometimes they don't have the ability to move their head. Now you get into the whole hay net thing, blah, blah, blah. You know, you got to do the best for your horse. So the best thing to do if you're feeding out of a stagnant feeder or hay net is to get your horse's teeth balanced, you know, every few years. Now, what else contributes to lack of anterior posterior motion is ridging. Now, if we look really closely here at, can you guys see that? We look really closely at the body, where am I here? The body of the horse's molars. There's like little tiny racetracks. You see them in there?
Yeah.
Those are the,
Yeah.
that's the enamel points. And see those dark spots in there? That's the dentin. Dentin is kind of the glue that holds these enamel ribbons together. And what happens is sometimes the dentin will be pulverized out and these sharp enamel edges will stand up. And then you'll have this, like I said, this horse has got a very nice mouth. I wish I would have had one that had more pathologies, but I don't. So sometimes what you're going to get is you're going to get multiple ridges all the way along, and you'll have a bump and a bump and a bump and a bump and a bump. And that is called accentuated transverse ridging. So basically it looks like alligator teeth or the top of a picket fence. And every now and then you'll get one tall ridge that just sticks up and starts cupping out an upper. And what that is that's one ridge or protruding tooth cupping out an upper tooth. All of these little pathologies will inhibit your anterior posterior motion of your jaw.
I'm wondering if you can tell me, and this could be totally wrong. I might have an example right beside me that I forgot that I had. Would you like to take a look? Can you see my screen? I'm like, if you can, oh, hold on here.
There you go. That's a beautiful example. Yes. And those are caps going to be coming off, I think. That's what that looks like. Yeah. And those are ridging. That's correct. So that's called accentuated transverse ridging. Now, those are caps that are going to be coming off of that young horse. But when those ridges lock together, the horse does not have any ability to move the jaw forward and back. So what essentially we would do is we would come in and just take those really high points that are sticking up, down a little bit, but we would not grind them down to the lowest valley. It's kind of like a series of mountains that are all like volcanoes, okay? And all of a sudden eruption will happen and the very tip of the volcano is blown off, but we still have the mountain. We have not gone in and turned the mountains into valleys or mountains into prairies. We still have the mountain, but we don't have the mountain peak. And then what that allows the horse to be able to do is be able to self-float, and he'll have a little bit of anterior posterior motion. And you'll come back in a year from now, from the time that we did the float, and he will have a nice, even arcade. So basically, we're setting the horse up for success. We're unlocking the jaw and allowing it to move laterally and also allowing it to move forward and back so he can naturally float his own balanced mouth. I'm not trying to put a different angle on the teeth. The angle is what the angle is. It's anywhere between 10 to 16 degrees of inclination of the angle of the teeth. You can see how the molars are actually angled up towards the inside like this, and on the top they're angled like that. Okay, they're sitting at that angle. The molars are not flat. Another thing that we have to be aware of is that the high side of the tooth, where my finger is on the bottom, that is where the sharp edge is. And the same on the upper teeth, the taller part of the tooth where my thumb is on the buccal side, which is the edge side, that's the taller side of the tooth. Now, if we go in and only address the tall side and grind away and round off these edges, what happens to our angle? It's flattened off. And we want to make sure that this angle is always maintained. So whatever we do to the edge side, if we decrease this edge side by, 2 or 3 millimeters, we have to go to the rim side, which is the dull side of the tooth, and usually is not even noticed or addressed at all because it's not sharp. We have to decrease this rim side by the same height that we did on the edge to maintain that angle. Now, this is a situation where we come across all the time. If just one side of the horse's mouth or one side of the horse's molar is addressed, the angle of the inclination of the teeth is taken to 0. And that's when you have horses that have a lot of problems masticating their hay, and sometimes they'll have ulcers, sometimes they'll have a lot of weight loss, and many times when the teeth are ground off completely flat, they'll have headaches because they're still trying to chew in this elliptical ability because it's following the TMJ, and now it's too slippery and they don't have anything to guide the jaw open and closed with, and it strains the TMJ muscles and tendons around the TMJ, and the horses actually will develop headaches. So maintaining your angle and inclination of the molars is extremely important. Now, another thing which is cool to see, when you have this angle in the horse's mouth, again, form and function, the angle is to grind the food appropriately, but it's also there to protect the TMJ joint from being stressed under motion. Now, we've all seen wild horses run. We've all seen domestic horses jump and barrel racers run around those barrels. And there is a lot of stress put on the jaw and on the poll of the horse. And when the horse gently closes his jaw, if I put this jaw together like this, I literally cannot move it from side to side. It's caught there because it has a bracing effect. And when the teeth are leveled off, the jaw actually gets really slippery, and the horse has to squeeze extremely hard in order to prevent the jaw from moving and protect the TMJ. So that's where we see horses that are overfloated have head shaking and trigeminal nerve pain that runs from the teeth through the poll and down into the body. Then we'll see horses that are very, very stiff along the top line as well. And don't think that overfloating teeth has anything or would not have anything to do with pelvises that are out. I'm seeing a correlation with that myself a lot. So it's kind of interesting to connect all the dots. So what do we do? What's the difference in someone who does natural balance dentistry? No power floating, no hanging. We address the incisors first. And if there is a tooth in here that is obstructing the lateral and anterior posterior motion, we will deal with that individual tooth. If it's tall, we'll take it down to the plane of the rest of the teeth. We'll decrease the hooks. We'll take off a little bit of the tall edge, but we don't round the edges off because the edges are needed there to cut hay. And then we'll address the rims that are generally ignored. And sometimes the rims can actually be taller than the edges if the edges have been overfloated consistently and then rims have never been addressed. So we try to maximize surface to surface contact the best we can. And when we are doing a pathological reset to bring the mobility back to the horse, we usually will call it and say we can't do anything for the horse when the horse gets to be about 22, because there's not enough growth in order to catch up on a reset. So if we can start working on the horses around the age of 8 to 15, we can dramatically correct a lot of pathologies that are causing the horse to have stiffness and pain as well as digestive issues. So I hope I addressed a lot of your questions.
We didn't even have to ask them. That was amazing. Sorry, Mira, go ahead.
No, it's all good. And it's perfect because you kind of ended with, you know, a question that I wanted to put to you, because I do think there's this real myth out there that you don't have to float a horse's teeth until they're older. And so I was going to ask you, you know, when to start, and I'm glad you spoke to it, that, you know, the earlier the better.
Yes, what we do, I've actually floated a 6-month-old foal, believe it or not. The foal had completely shut down, was not eating, was not engaged with his buddies, had a dull eye, was depressed, and there was a chiropractor that looked at it and said that the jaw was out of place, and a veterinarian had looked at it and said the jaw was broken and fused. So the young girl called me and said, "You're my last stop. I just want your opinion." And I went out and I said, "Well, it's not broken and it's not fused." I said, "It's locked up." And I thought, it's only 6 months. So I started thinking about what my prof would have told me. And I'm thinking, wow, I've never really floated a 6-month-old foal before. And then I could hear his voice in my head and said, "Does it function?" And the answer would be no. "And is it a horse?" The answer would be yes. "Well, then fix it." That's basically what I heard him say. So I got in and I just ran my float down, just one swipe down each side. And I got a call 3 days later. She said the lights have come on in his eyes. He's running around, he's hopping, he's bucking, he's playing with his friends. And that horse was recommended to be put down. Wow. So, and the thing was, he had massive, massive edges and rims, and had ATR that was probably almost 1/4 of an inch deep on a baby at 6 months. That's very deep. So I just took the top of the volcano off, allowed him to be able to move his jaw properly, and he started chewing. And again, in the wild, he would have been eating rocks and sticks and hard things like that, and he would have been self-floating his teeth. And interestingly enough, he came from a farm where I originally went and saw the stallion, and the stallion had a terrible, terrible parrot mouth and terrible pathology in his mouth. He was not a good specimen. He should never have been used as a stud. And every one of his offspring had difficulties with the balance of their mouth. So I saw him at 6 months, at a year, at 2 years, 3, and now I saw him at 3, and now he's 5, and he is still good. And then so I will look at him again when he's 6. So once you get them going, and you want to usually check your horses every year, like I said, when they're losing their caps and they're young, up until about the ages of 6. And then if everything's functioning properly, you should be able to not have to go and see them until they're about 8. And then the older the horse, the slower the eruption, the harder the teeth get, the less they need dentistry. And it's usually told that the owners are advised to do more often every 6 months as the horse gets older. And that's totally the opposite, because you can literally overfloat the horses. And that's why so many older horses have a lot of problems with their bodies as well as their digestion, because they are overflowed.
It's so sad, because a lot of these owners really mean well, you know, and they're trying to keep their horses' mouths looked at regularly because they feel that's the right thing to do, and they don't have that bit of education. So hopefully, you know, this bit of information that you're sharing will help some people help their horses.
Now, as a horse owner, I get asked this a lot, and it's very important for people to be able to make their choice, have their choice of who they want to practice. And like I said, there are very bad dentists out there, and there's very good ones. And there's very bad vets out there, and there's very good ones. I mean, it's all over the map, right? And we all know that. And there's good farriers, there's bad farriers, we're everywhere, you know, good and the bad. So the thing is, you want to make educated choices. And if you see hooks on your corner incisors and you're told they don't matter because they don't grind food, that's a fallacy. A hook on a corner incisor is going to inhibit anterior posterior motion of the jaw. That needs to be addressed. So if you see your practitioner, whether it's a vet or a dentist, not addressing that, you question them and you ask them why. Okay, so basically, why would you do that? Ask a question, be that little bug in their ear, because it makes them think too. And if enough people ask them why, maybe they'll go home and go, well, why don't I do that? You know, why should I be doing that? And if you want to find somebody different, then it's your animal, you have the right. Now, as far as understanding and being able to check to see if your horse needs a float or is operating correctly before or after the float, there's a couple things you can do as long as your horse is cooperative. Sometimes they just don't want you near their mouth, which is also a problem. If they don't want you in their mouth, there's a reason. It's probably uncomfortable. So that's also a situation where I've seen many horses, after they've been set up correctly and are balanced, they don't mind you going in their mouth. So when we're looking at the incisors to see if they have anterior posterior motion, when the horse's head is near the ground, I'm going to see if I can get this set up properly. When the horse's head is near the ground, there we go. The bottom jaw, or there's only one bottom jaw, the jaw should come forward, and the top incisors should go back, the lower incisors should come forward. When the horse's head is at pole level, his incisors should be even. And when you push his head up above your head and look, the incisors on the bottom should go back and the top incisors should come forward. That's proper AP motion. Okay, you need to be able to see the forward and back motion of the jaw, and that's how you check that. If your horse stays forward on the bottom, or stays back, or stays even, when you're lifting and lowering his head, he doesn't have AP. There's something going on in the mouth that is causing lack of anterior posterior motion. When you're checking for lateral, you hang on to the horse's nose and his jaw, and you want to feel a clear grind all the way across, and you want to hear the horse grind. You don't want to hear a squeak, and you don't want to not hear anything. You need to hear a grind all the way across, and there should be no catching. If you go to grind the horse's teeth or move their jaw, and you feel something catching and it goes click, 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 one way or another, or more one way than the other, then you know that the lateral motion is impeded. And a lot of times after a float, where you only do one side, you're only addressing the edges and not addressing the dull side of the tooth, the rims, you will still not have proper lateral motion, because the rims are generally higher than the edges were to begin with, because they've only decreased one side of the molar. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that does. That's really nice to know for people who are thinking, okay, how can I check to see what's going on in my horse's mouth?
Exactly. Now, a couple other points before we go here, and then I'll open it up to some questions in that. When you go to buy a horse, if you want to know whether he has proper angulation on the molars, but you can't stick your hand in there, and how do you tell? Remember that the molars have an angle to them, like I was showing you guys. When you move their jaw sideways, see how the upper maxilla will actually rise and open? There will be a space between their incisors, and it'll rise and open like that. That's because the molars are running up the inclination. They're running up their angle. You see that? It's supposed to go cross and open. That horse has really nice angulation to his molars. Now, I can't do the opposite with this guy because he's got nice angulation. But if you have a horse that's overfloated, he will stay there. I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to push. He will stay very flat like this. You will see no rise. No open and rise. He'll just go from side to side. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's how you can tell. The incisors should do this if they've been floated, or if they have a good angle to them. And if they've been overfloated, the incisors will just do this. They will not open. That's how you can tell what's going on in the horse's mouth at the back of the mouth. And I was going to tell you guys one more thing, and it's escaped me.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sure it will come back.
Yeah. So, but like I was telling you guys before, it's the education system that the young veterinarians in the colleges throughout Canada and many in the United States, and it's not anybody's fault, it's because the profs even are not keeping up in their continual education, and they do not understand pathologies within the horse's mouth. It's exactly the same as hoof trimming and understanding pathologies of the hoof, because it is what it is. The hoof is the way it looks, and you can't change it. The horse's mouth is the way it looks, and you can't change it. That's not true. There's always time to be able to make corrections as long as we have enough life of the horse. So if the horse is, at 22 to 25 years old, it is what it is. But if the horse is anywhere between 6 and 15, we can certainly correct a lot of pathologies that are going to show up as terrible, debilitating problems in the horse's mouths. And unfortunately, the colleges are not teaching the students how to address the pathologies in the mouth. The only thing they're concerned about is these sharp edges. That's what I was going to tell you. When we hear, oh, you got to have the horse's teeth floated because there's ulcerations on the cheek. We have all heard that, and the sharp edges. That's the justification for rounding off these edges to a pencil, because now we can't masticate the food, but the horse isn't cutting the cheeks. What cuts the cheeks is when we have the Cookie Monster chewing. Okay? When the horse is chewing properly, and he can open his mouth and go out and come up and in, where are the edges? We are thinking caps on now. And where's his skin of his cheek? Is over here. And where's the edges of the bottom?
They're far away from those cheeks.
Correct. So if the horse can chew properly and open his mouth, go lateral, and then come up and in, the edges on the lower lingual side or tongue side masticate the hay and cut the hay with the edges on the upper that are on the cheek side. But meanwhile, the cheek is being held way out here. He can't bite his cheek if he has proper lateral and AP motion. It's when he doesn't and he starts chewing like the Cookie Monster. When you do this, you suck your cheeks in because of the pressure. So that's the first indication that the horse's mouth has a pathology that is not allowing the proper anterior, posterior motion and lateral motion of the jaw. That's when they start biting their cheeks. So it's not about the edges. The edges are not the enemy. It's kind of like an underrun heel and long toe. It's not the heel that's a problem in a horse's hoof. It's the long toe. Fix the toe, you'll fix the heel. Don't chase something that's already broken, which is the heel. It's the same thing. Fix the motion, anterior, posterior, lateral motion of the jaw. The cheeks will heal. Don't overgrind the edges, because now you're increasing other problems.
That was so incredibly informative. And I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I wanted to touch on something that you said at the very beginning, and when you were telling us your story of how you got started and the heartbreaking experience that you had with your horse. And you talked a little bit about you know, which most of us horse owners have seen, that hanging method, where the horse's head is way up in the air and they're kind of hanging off of their skull and their atlas. I've seen your work, and I'd love for you to describe what it looks like when someone's not using that method, what you do. I feel like that's valuable, so people, when they see a practitioner working, they kind of know what would be nice to see. Oh.
Okay, well, first of all, what we see is, do you want both scenarios or just my scenario of what I do?
What you do would be great.
Okay. What we were taught in school was, first of all, when we put the speculum on the horse's mouth, we're only allowed to go to 2 clicks on the speculum. So the speculum has these little grooves that the speculum will notch into when we open the mouth. And it's just barely enough for me to get my hand in the horse's mouth. And two clicks will open the horse's mouth roughly, likely about 2.5 inches. The incisors will open up only about 2.5 inches. Basically, yeah, about that much. So I can just barely get my hand in there. And if we had to open it to 3 clicks, you couldn't open it to 3 clicks more than 15 seconds each time. And then you had to always close. If your hand wasn't in the horse's mouth, or there wasn't a tool in the mouth, an instrument, you had to close the mouth. And if you failed to do this, you would fail your final exam, because the pressure that it puts, not necessarily, but you can open a horse's mouth. A horse's mouth can open a great deal. But what is painful for them is when they're trying to squeeze and close their mouth, it puts a lot of pressure and on these little muscles of the TMJ joint. So you always want to be able to close the mouth and let the horse relax between your procedures. And sometimes before I even do anything to the horse, I'll open the speculum, give the horse my promise that I'm going to close it. I open it and I close it. I don't do anything. I open it, I go and wash my tool, I'll come back, I'll close it, then I'll open it again. And the horse knows then this isn't going to be scary. And then they start to kind of play with it. And the horse can still open its jaw more than what the speculum is actually set at. Now, I never ever restrain the horse. I don't even really like the owners holding on to the horse when I'm doing this. I will leave the lead rope and the halter on, so I can just basically step on the lead rope just to stabilize the horse from going forward and back. And if the horse decides to lift its head up, the lead rope will just slide out from underneath my foot. And if the horse decides to walk away, we'll go for a walk. I can easily float and walk at the same time, because the horse's natural defense is to flee. So if we don't back them into a corner, and we don't hang them from their head, and we don't gape their mouth so they're really feeling vulnerable, then the horses are much more relaxed. And they'll generally, sometimes they'll back up, sometimes they'll walk forward, and after they flee a little bit and get that out of the system, then they go, okay, well, this isn't that bad. You know, you get the odd horse that is a little bit more challenging, but then you just take it slower. And once you build their trust, the next time you come back, it's easier and easier and easier. And finally they go, oh yeah, you again? And the more you come back and build their trust, and as you set up the teeth so they function properly, when you do get back, you're literally doing a fraction of the work needed. And most of the time, what upsets the people the most about what I do is how little I do and how quickly I'm out of the horse's mouth, and how long that their horses were hung and floated previously to that with a power float for like 45 minutes. And that upsets them the most, to understand that I was able to bring function back in like 10 to 15 minutes. Meanwhile, they've seen it go on a lot longer. And that's sad, and again, it's not the vet's fault or the dentist's fault, it's the education. It's the education system, and we have to change it at the institution where it's being taught. And that's kind of on my bucket list. Hopefully one day I'll be able to run a school where, in the United States, there are schools where the veterinarians will go and actually learn from the dentists. There's one in Michigan. The fellow's a dentist, and he practices at the vet university and teaches all the vets there how to do natural balance dentistry using hand tools, but it's illegal for him to practice dentistry in Michigan. So he just goes where the states he can. So that's kind of funny, isn't it? So it's come to that, but at least there's veterinarians in Michigan that have a very good practice because of him. So
Wonderful.
Well, I so appreciate, it was so thorough. I feel like I'm walking away with so much more knowledge, and I really appreciate how much detail you went into, because really, when we know better, we do better as horse owners and otherwise. So I just really appreciate you being able to be with us today and just share your knowledge.
Oh, you're very welcome. And if you know the right people, you don't really see a lot of equine dentist cards floating around, because we're kind of like UFOs. We're out there, but we're hard to see.
Yeah.
And we're hard to find, but we're out there. There's quite a few practicing across the prairies, and as well as, I don't know about BC. I'm not sure how many are out there, but there's plenty in Alberta as well. You can't swing a sack of hammers without running into an equine dentist in Alberta. And as far as I know, Eastern Canada, there's a few, but not very many. So, but we're out there. You just have to know who to ask.
And if you're in British Columbia and you want to be able to make what this dentist does legal here in BC, joining the BC Animal Owners Association, BC AOA, anyways.
AOA.
Thank you. Is a good way to kind of start that process. They're working hard to make it so that animal owners can choose what practitioners they use in British Columbia. So hopefully we'll see some changes there soon. But yeah, thank you so much. I feel like that was, as Mira said so beautifully, that was so incredibly in-depth, but you were clear, and I'm excited to see what people get out of this. Now, I think, Mira, are you feeling like that's a wrap?
I think that's a wrap.
If you want more Friends on Horses, you can find us on Facebook at Friends on Horses Podcast.
Check it out for all the latest and greatest horsey news.
You can find us on the web at friendsonhorsespodcast.com
or Instagram at friendsonhorses_podcast.
Like what you hear? Help us quit our hay jobs by supporting Friends on Horses. You can support us by rating our episodes on iTunes,
becoming an ongoing sponsor through Patreon,
or simply by spreading the word about our show.
Have some feedback?
We'd love to hear from you.
Contact us via email at friendsonhorses@gmail.com.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.